Good evening and welcome to Africa's Vision Network. Africa's Vision Network features African cultural awareness, education, economic empowerment, religion, spirituality, and other issues focusing on the African world. I am Princess Ayo, your host for the show. We are doing part 2 of our show on Miss Amanda Sullivan Rudd and her rise from prejudice to the seat of power. And if you were involved in part 1, you know it has been a roaring time with her. We've heard so many interesting stories, and we're going to continue from there. But for those of you that are joining us for the first time, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Amanda Sullivan. She was born and reared in the South, in the rural area of Greenville, South Carolina. She was the 7th of 12 children born to Wesley and Delarian Moore Sullivan. The number 7 has special significance in the Bible, representing completeness and perfection. And God blessed Amanda. She had wonderful parents that gave her a firm foundation for the many challenges she would confront in life's journey. She was blessed with a wise sage for a mother and a protective and caring father. Her father was a farmer. Her mother took care of the children and was active in the church and the community. Her parents were very religious and ensured that she and her sibling were rooted and grounded in God. As a child, she began teaching Sunday school, playing the piano and singing in the choir. Possessing a curious and inquisitive mind, she developed a passion for books and reading. Excelling in high school, she graduated as valedictorian. She received a major in education and a minor in library sciences from Florida A&M University in Tallahassee, Florida. In 1962, she received a master's in library science from Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio. Amanda has appeared in Ebony magazine and several other publications. She holds the distinction of being the first African American and woman to head the Chicago Public Library, the largest library in the country. Amanda is a world traveler. Her position as consultant to World Book and commissioner of the Public Library took her to many countries around the world. She has given presentations in several countries like Japan, India, Mexico, Sweden, and West Germany. Today, at 82, mind you, she is retired and living in Arlington, Virginia. However, she still gets itchy feet and travels to other countries whenever she has the opportunity. She is concerned that her extended family remains connected. She is the proud mother of a daughter, Loretta, and a son, Grover Cleveland. Welcome again to Africa's Vision Network.
Thank you.
We're at our part 2, and part 2, we're going to talk about this amazing thing that should happen to an African-American woman. I believe at that time that you should become the librarian commissioner in Chicago. How did this happen?
Well, it was the progression of things.
Okay.
When I was at World Book for 5 years, and when the mergers began and Amway bought World No. And their first question was, how much money do these consultants bring in? You know, the almighty dollar. And there's no price tag. We were goodwill ambassadors for the company and for other educational institutions. And of course, the managers just were brokenhearted that we were phased out. Well, I want you to know that I got the news that morning, and at 2 o'clock that afternoon, I had an appointment because, you know, you find the job. And so, meanwhile, I saw an advertisement at the Chicago Public Library because, see, I was going to try to go to the school system. Okay. And I called the public library, went over, and was hired immediately as the assistant supervisor of community services, I think. You know, Chicago is the city of communities, and we were especially having problems in some of the Latino communities regarding service from the library. And that was my position, for which I stayed in, I think, probably about a year. Okay. Had a wonderful director from whom I learned so much. He was a very wonderful man, compassionate and so on. And he was also interesting in that wherever he was going, you know, there were certain suburbs where we black people just didn't go, and there's some suburbs where there's virtually no black people. And anytime there were receptions or someone was speaking or something and he was going, he took me. And, you know, I got eyes and looks, but I walked in proudly. I was with him, and,
Yes.
and it was okay. And I got to see their collections of materials and compare them with ours. And I was always looking for something to see the differences. But at any rate, I stayed in that position for a little less than a year. And one day he called me to go to lunch and took me to a very elegant restaurant. And we were talking about, what does he want? And finally he said to me, it came to me in the shower today. And I said, what? He said, I have been looking for a deputy commissioner, and here you are right under my nose. Will you be my deputy commissioner?
Oh, my goodness.
And I was startled. I could not believe it. And finally, somewhere along the way, I said yes. And it was an absolute joy to work with. And I think maybe in that position was the happiest that I had. It's wonderful being second in command with with a boss who's empathetic and who is, you know, knows what he's doing, what he wants to do, and so on. So that was a good learning period. But meanwhile, Chicago is a political town, and I got to know the people there and so on. And incidentally, on my board was John Hope Franklin, whom you may know, but the person who you know is the research person, you know, and Americans. And it was wonderful having him on the board because he brought order to the board, and that was a wonderful experience. But meanwhile, in all of the things that we were doing, it worked out, and finally, my boss left and went to another assignment. And so I was not going to apply for the job, except John Hope Franklin said to me, you're in the second position, and it's automatic that you ought to apply. And I said, okay, and took that advice. I applied. And so the day before it was to be announced, one of the board members took me to lunch to tell me that I didn't have the position. And then later he said to me, he said, you look so relieved when you said, and I was relieved. I didn't want it. I really didn't. I was enjoying learning and having second in command. I could pass the responsibility on to someone else. The real. And so then eventually he left. And when he left, the mayor said to me at a function, a social function, and she said, you're going to be my next commissioner. And so I knew that I could not turn that one down. The black community would have killed me. And so I took the job. And it was from this job, and in Chicago, the fact that I was the first woman and first black woman generated a lot of media, and I was on television show after television show and interviewed by everybody. And it was the interview that I mentioned earlier where it became known that I had been turned away from the library in Greenville, South Carolina. And the reporter who asked me what I told my father, and I told her not. I didn't, and told her why, and she said, how did I feel? And I told her, I don't remember feeling anyway. And she sat there and just cried and cried. And then it got out, and now I had to make the rounds back to all these TV stations to talk about being turned away. And of course, it was all right because the library was getting publicity, and I had a chance to tell them about my programs, the things that I wanted to push. And my concern was the children and opening doors for them to use our libraries. And I had a goal to increase from 770,000 to 1 million readers in a year. That was my goal, one of several goals I had. And I got a chance to say that, and it became citywide. Right. So that was a nice thing about that. But from that, with the staff, I had 1,500 staff members at the time, a budget of around somewhere between $40 and $60 million, and a board of directors. And I've often wondered why we have boards, you know, but we had a board, and it was a great experience. I got a lot of support, and I got a lot of flack. I think anyone does. This is an excuse, but I did my best. I did my
tell
best.
us what a librarian commissioner does.
Okay.
And are you the boss of our librarians that we see? Would that commissioner be the boss of the librarian, or the boss of the head of the libraries? What is the word?
Well, under me, we had what we call, I think sometimes, executive cabinet. I had an assistant commissioner who was in charge of the branches. We had, I think, 82 branches, plus some special libraries, like Library for Blind and Physical Handicap, and the jail library, and so on. We had an assistant commissioner for that. We had an assistant commissioner for, what would you call it? The non-librarian duties. Okay. We had a fleet of cars and trucks for deliveries and delivery of books and all of that thing, the cleanup crew and so on. And then we had someone to head the main library. See, the main library, which is equivalent to the Arlington Library on Duke Street and Alexandria's on Quincy. So the main library is a hub of all the other libraries, and we had a person in charge of that. Okay. Now, those people reported to me on a weekly basis, and we assessed our progress and what we were doing and so on. But they had responsibility, and now under them, for instance, in the 82 branches, each of them had what we call a district chief of the north, south, east, and west. And they were the ones who really went into the branches on a daily basis and worked with the people. Okay. And we were. So
the commissioner was more the political person that pulled the funds in? Or?
Well, we tried to keep the politics out of that, but the politics are there. And of course, the city, Chicago is pretty supportive of its library system. In some cases, we had too many, but the alderman, if the alderman wants a library over there in his district, but I got involved because I went to a lot of libraries myself. And one of the articles pointed out that I used to go, I was going to the grocery store and whatever, if I passed the library, I automatically dropped in and I just dropped in to say hello, how are you doing? And sometimes I would find them with needs that could be fulfilled. I remember stopping by a library on a very, very hot day, and it was in a Latina community, and the woman was there, and the windows were open, and of course that hot air circulating. And I said, how are you standing this? Why haven't you closed? And she said, oh, the school children will be here. Well, I went back to the car, and I said, I called then my director of maintenance, and I said, don't you have some fans? And he said, yeah. I said, will you see that, this branch gets it? Well, that was big brownie points for me. Just big brownie points. But they needed it right away, and we wanted it right away. Now, I sometimes got accused of not recognizing my people. But had I come back and called the assistant commissioner to get can't we get a fan out there, then he was going to have to write up a requisition.
It would take a while.
It was going to go a while and all of this. Well, I didn't call him. I didn't think about calling him. I just picked up the phone at that point, and I reserved the right to do it. That was a small issue. That wasn't anything. Let me tell you how I got the phone.
Yes, dude.
I thought about that. The phone. I had. This was, phones were just coming out.
I'm saying, thinking.
And I had 2 board members in the car with me. They were going to the library with me, and one of them turned back to use the phone to call somebody, and I said, I don't have a phone. They said, how do you operate without a phone? Well, that was amusing to me. But I said, it's not easy.
That's right. You did.
Well, 2 days later, I had a phone. I had a phone, yeah, and it did help. But you can't miss what you haven't had. I hadn't had one before, and I hadn't really thought about it. Sometimes we're so busy working, we don't think about those things that might help us with our work.
But I love the answer. So it's not easy.
Yeah.
What now for the person that's there now? If they still have that system going on in the different places around the country, commissioners.
Yes. Yeah.
What is so important about that position?
Oh, what, the commissioner?
The commissioner position.
Oh, the commissioner position there in Chicago, most places the head of the library is called director. And when I went there, it was a director. It was called director. But the library, the board felt, was not getting the respect, the funding, and cooperation that other city departments had. All the other city departments, the head of them were commissioners, like Streets and Sands, Housing, and Police Department, and so on. And so they asked that our position be changed. And so we became commissioners. And the public doesn't understand that. And since I've moved here, I tend to use the word director rather than commissioners, because I think people don't quite know what I did. Was that a board member or what?
Right.
But that was it. But it did make a difference. We went to all of the mayor's meetings, all the executive councils. We were included in everything, invitations to everything, and it did make a difference.
It made a
because
difference.
the political people do a lot of stuff.
That we don't know about.
Yes, yes.
And maybe you're about to find out with America going the way it is, right?
Absolutely.
Hopefully we will. Now, was it difficult for you to do this job, or was it easy for you? And I'm thinking of your work as in the World Book Encyclopedia, the Goodwill Ambassador.
Yeah.
It was like, did that make
this was goodwill to a point. It was challenging because your time wasn't your own. Right. You had to be involved in city things, and there was something always going on at a branch. And I tried to go to as many as I could because it's important that you take the time to do that, the person in charge, because they kind of think you're just sitting around the office down there, you know. But I go through, I talk to people a lot. I talk to the children, I talk to parents, but when I see children at school, you know, I ask them questions that indicates to me something about the collection and so on. Or I look at the collection and for instance, things can happen. I remember that we had a budget to put artwork in branches. And we had someone who put artwork in but didn't consider the branch and the population. Right. And they put the Book of Kells into a black neighborhood when there are so much black art that could go and would be appropriate to that. And then we did have branches that the Books of Kells, several of them, it was very appropriate. And that's one of the many examples. And so when I would see this kind of thing, because even with the staff like this and interested people, sometimes they just really aren't observant. And I try to see everything. I just see things. And I wonder why they have that. And I talk to children all the time about the word why. You know, you don't use the word why enough. Ask why and how, and you don't get them doing that. You know, because that's the key that gets you in. You know.
Did you get any jealousies or envy?
Oh yes. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, and it comes in interesting ways. It's sort of subtle things that's down, and you kind of get picked apart. Now, I don't know that library staffs are any different, let's say, than what you're working or working here at the station or whatever, but they are very protective of the person in charge, but at the same time, very critical. And so you have to separate those two, because you might very well go out and get all the praise in the world, and before you're back to your office, you know, you've been ripped apart, or some telephones have called or something. But this does enter the picture. One of the things that entered the picture in Chicago was this car business, and I'll never forget it. CBS News decided that I was not deserving of a car. And they then started writing all kinds of articles about it. And one morning I came out to go to work, 7:30, and the driver was there, and I looked over, and there they sat in the car, observing when I came, taking pictures, and so on. And so I had a rash of discussions about the car. And the black community didn't come to my rescue. And I didn't come to my rescue very much. I thought it was a bunch of nothing. And so eventually I get tired. I'm a commissioner, and many of the commissioners had full-time people working for them who had jobs that required guards. And I only had the driver when I needed to be, and then he went his way. So I didn't bother with it, but that's the kind of bad press I got. And then a friend of mine who was director of Houston Public Library called me one day, and he said, he had a driver in a car, and he said, his boss had told him, could you get Amanda to stop all that noise up there? He said, I don't want my board to start. To start talking about us. But that's kind of the fun of it. You had the other directors around the country that you call and commiserate with each other.
Yes.
And how did you do this and how did you do that?
Were there any other people of color who were in high positions like that that you could talk to?
Yes. The commissioner of housing, whatever that one is, Lenora Cartwright was very influential, and when after Harold Washington died, then Mayor Byrne was there, and no, it was before Harold Washington, and she used to always take her to New York with her when she was meeting with the city fathers on the funding for the city and so on, and she made a very good impression. We also had at that time Ruth Love, who was in charge of the school, so we were the three women there that was in charge. And
so at least you didn't feel all alone.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Someone to call
and you know, you have that language where you walk in and you know, well, she's got another problem, you know. but it's good comradeship, and they were great to work with.
Wow. Did you feel prepared to be a commissioner?
I felt much more prepared than I was before. And occasionally I would run into situations, for instance, when you have not had the basic reading list that schools have now, like my grandchildren and children had, and so on, and you miss those, it's impossible to pick it up. You can't read that much. And if something came up where an author needed to be quoted or something like that, and I felt I ought to be able to do that, and I just simply wasn't, because I hadn't gotten to that. There was a sort of a sinking feeling in me about it. But when you become commissioner, there is so much to do and so many areas to go and so much PR, and you're called on a lot to do things. And you try to do that, because if I'm doing them, I'm getting notice for the library, and I want the library pushed, not Amanda pushed, but the public library pushed as the information center of the city, and that's what I worked for. But it was nice.
Now, in this job, did you travel all over the world?
Yes. And it was sort of the beginning of my world travel, because there are two national organizations, International Federation of Library Association, meets in major countries all over the world. And I attended, and when it met in Mexico City, I spoke to them about our services in Chicago. But it met in Leipzig, Germany, in Berlin, West Berlin at the time, and Sweden, which is have a great library system there. Incidentally, you're a storyteller. Their children's librarians have to take a course in storytelling. Can you imagine that in a hospital? That's the nurses, the children's nurses, take a course in storytelling. I thought that was fantastic.
That is.
But it was all over, and of course we hosted this while I was there. We hosted it in Chicago, and so it's a lot of work. I went to New York a lot because I was on the organizing committee, and that was fun to do. And the other organization is an organization of library directors all over the world, and that was really fun because everybody there was reacting to the same thing, your programs and so on. And that's when I found how much our country supports these libraries all over the world.
They do.
Yes, they do. I was real annoyed, I must admit, when I went to West Berlin and saw that beautiful library they have. An architect who was a naval person had designed it, and it's like a ship. It was beautiful. And the state library in Springfield, Illinois, looks like a dump. And I thought, oh.
But you've done so much to make it better for us. And
I hope so.
Can you believe that she's telling me I have a minute?
Oh, she's not.
Can you believe it?
You're fun to talk with. I think we
you
both
are
like,
too.
We both like to talk.
Yes, and libraries.
Yeah.
Oh, I love them. I know you have an article here that you love to.
Yeah, I have
read.
this article.
And I
one
want
of the
us to-
reporters who
Yeah.
I think captured what I do well. And when I read the article, I thought, this is like my resume. And she ends the article with this. At these times, when Commissioner Rudd is alone and reflecting upon her experiences, I wonder if she ever thinks about little Amanda, who wasn't allowed to use the white library. What poetic justice.
I'm telling you.
And I love that.
Amazing.
I love that. Yes.
Do you think about it?
Yeah. I think about it. Listen, when I stood in front of Basil's cathedral in Russia, and when I stood in front of the Parthenon, when I stood on the Nile in Egypt, and I thought about my parents. God, I wish Mama and Papa could see me now. I wish Mama and Papa could see me now. And these are the things that I go all over. I stood in front of Lenin's tomb, and I thought, look at me.
Wow.
Me.
Yes.
Yeah. So traveling is my thing. It's what I do in lieu of. I do the research before I go and I look and I come back and it's just wonderful. So
it's exciting because to me it's an example for my audience that we're so happy that you joined us during this. I hope you've enjoyed it. To say it's possible.
Yes, it is.
If someone can come from Greenville, South Carolina and go that far, it's possible for anyone.
And be happy doing it.
Thank you so much for coming
and
having us 2 months of you doing the show. We really appreciate you.
Well, thank you for having me.
And I know you've enjoyed this. I know it's been interesting for you. Thank you for sticking with us for the 2 parts. And look forward to another interesting show that we'll have for you on Africa's Vision Network. Thank you.